What if the moment that changes everything isn't an apology, a message, or a dramatic reunion, but a stranger speaking the truth when you aren't even there to defend yourself? Life has a mysterious way of revealing a person's real character through the voices of those who have nothing to gain by telling the truth. That is exactly what has happened to your soulmate. They weren't looking for a reason to think about you again. In fact, they believed they had already accepted everything they needed to know about this connection. They had built a story in their heart, convinced themselves they understood who you were, and quietly moved forward with that belief. But then something completely unexpected happened. During an ordinary conversation, someone mentioned your name. What began as a simple discussion suddenly became something far more powerful, because instead of agreeing with everything your soulmate believed, this person calmly defended you. They spoke about your kindness when nobody was watching. They spoke about your loyalty, your honesty, and the quiet way you always put other people before yourself. Most importantly, they described a version of you that sounded completely different from the one your soulmate had been carrying in their mind. Those words weren't exaggerated. They weren't spoken to persuade anyone. They came naturally, as though the truth no longer wished to remain hidden. Imagine spending years believing a painting was dark because you had only seen it under a single dim light. Then one day, someone quietly opens the curtains and colors you never knew existed suddenly fill the entire room. The painting never changed. Only the light did. That is what is beginning to happen inside your soulmate's heart. They are looking back at your smiles, your silence, your patience, and even your distance with completely different eyes. Memories they believed were settled are slowly coming back, asking to be understood one more time. They are beginning to wonder if they focused too much on isolated moments and not enough on the person you consistently showed yourself to be. The hardest realization is not that someone defended you. The hardest realization is that the person defending you had no reason to protect your reputation unless everything they were saying was genuine. That thought has become impossible for your soulmate to ignore. It keeps returning in quiet moments, making them question whether they truly saw your heart or only the version their emotions allowed them to see. Stay with me, because that single conversation didn't just introduce them to a different perspective. It opened the door to a truth that is about to transform every memory they have of this connection. And once they finally understand what was hidden in plain sight all along, nothing about the way they see you will ever be the same again. The words they heard should have been easy to dismiss. Yet they weren't. There was something about the sincerity in that person's voice that stayed with your soulmate long after the conversation had ended. It wasn't an emotional speech meant to convince anyone. It wasn't someone trying to take sides or rewrite the past. It was simply an honest description of the person they knew you to be. They spoke about your character with a quiet certainty that cannot be faked. They described how you always chose patience when anger would have been easier. They remembered the way you helped people without announcing it, the way you carried responsibilities without expecting recognition, and the way you protected the feelings of others even when your own heart was quietly hurting. The more your soulmate listened, the more something inside them began to shift. They realized this person had nothing to gain by defending you. There was no reason to exaggerate your goodness or invent qualities that didn't exist. They were simply speaking from experience. As the old saying reminds us, a good name is earned in silence but revealed through the memories of others. That truth has now found its way into your soulmate's heart, and it refuses to leave. Imagine walking through a forest, believing one particular tree is lifeless because you only ever saw it during winter. Then someone who has watched that same tree through every season gently tells you about the blossoms that appear each spring, the shade it offers in summer, and the quiet beauty it carries in autumn. Suddenly you realize your opinion was built upon seeing only one chapter of its story. That is exactly what is happening now. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that they may have judged your heart during one difficult season without ever seeing the fullness of who you truly are. They had seen moments of silence, moments of distance, moments when your energy changed, but they had never fully understood the reasons behind them. Now another person's perspective is opening a window they never knew existed. Instead of seeing isolated moments, they are beginning to see the consistency of your character. They are realizing that kindness was never something you performed when it was convenient. It was simply the way you lived. Perhaps you've wondered why you never fought harder to prove yourself. Maybe there were nights when you questioned whether remaining silent was the right decision. You could have defended every misunderstanding. You could have explained every action and corrected every false assumption. But deep inside, you understood something that many people only learn after years of emotional struggle. Character cannot be argued into existence. It reveals itself over time. If someone only believes in your goodness because you constantly remind them of it, then they have not truly seen your heart. So instead of chasing validation, you allowed your actions to speak long after the conversations had ended. You trusted that the people who genuinely knew you would eventually become living proof of the person you had always been. As another timeless truth says, integrity is what people remember when you are no longer in the room. That is exactly what happened. You weren't there to defend yourself. Yet someone else naturally spoke the truth because your life had already written the evidence. Imagine a candle that quietly lights hundreds of other candles without ever losing its own flame. Most people notice the light but rarely stop to think about where it began. Then one day, someone points toward the original flame, and suddenly everyone understands what had been illuminating the room all along. That is what your soulmate is beginning to experience. They are discovering that many of the qualities they admired in others were qualities you quietly carried yourself. They are remembering the countless times you offered encouragement without expecting anything in return. They are recalling moments when you stayed calm while others became impatient. They are seeing how often you chose understanding instead of judgment. These memories once seemed ordinary because they happened so naturally. Now they appear extraordinary because another person's words have given them a completely new meaning. The greatest surprise isn't simply hearing someone praise you. The greatest surprise is realizing how closely those words match memories your soulmate had almost forgotten. They remember the way you listened without interrupting. They remember how you celebrated other people's victories without making everything about yourself. They remember the quiet compassion you showed to people who could offer you nothing in return. Little by little, the person they recently heard describing you is beginning to sound exactly like the person they once knew, but somehow stopped seeing clearly. Every memory becomes another confirmation that your true nature was always present. It was simply overshadowed by emotion, misunderstanding, or circumstances that made it difficult to recognize at the time. Now your soulmate finds themselves asking a question that grows louder with every passing day. If someone else could see your heart so clearly, why couldn't they? Why did it take another person's honesty to reveal qualities that had been standing in front of them all along? That question is humbling because it challenges more than their memories. It challenges the way they judged people, the way they interpreted silence, and the way they measured love. They are beginning to understand that actions reveal character far more faithfully than assumptions ever can. And perhaps the most powerful realization of all is this: the person defending you wasn't trying to make your soulmate fall in love with you again. They were simply telling the truth. Yet sometimes one sincere truth, spoken without expectation, has more power to heal a wounded heart than 1,000 explanations ever could. Now that those words have taken root, your soulmate can no longer see you through the same eyes they once did. Because they are finally beginning to see you through the eyes of someone who recognized your heart long before they did. There is something extraordinary that happens when one honest truth enters a heart that has been carrying the wrong story for far too long. At first, nothing seems different. People continue with their day, convincing themselves they have already moved on. But beneath the surface, something quietly begins to change. A single sentence refuses to disappear. A memory returns unexpectedly. An old conversation suddenly sounds different. That is exactly what is happening to your soulmate now. Ever since they heard someone speak about you with such genuine respect, their heart has become restless. They keep replaying those words, comparing them with everything they personally experienced with you. The more they reflect, the more they realize something they never expected. The version of you they recently heard described feels far more consistent with your actions than the version they had created through moments of misunderstanding. As the old saying reminds us, truth doesn't force the door open. It waits patiently until the heart is ready to unlock it. That quiet unlocking has finally begun. Imagine looking at the night sky through thick clouds for years. You know the stars are there, but you can only catch small glimpses between the darkness. Then one evening, the clouds slowly drift away, and the entire sky reveals itself exactly as it had always been. The stars never appeared because they were newly created. They became visible because the obstacle hiding them had finally moved. That is what your soulmate is experiencing with every memory of you. They are remembering moments that once seemed ordinary, but now feel incredibly meaningful. They remember the times you listened without interrupting, even when your own emotions were difficult to carry. They remember how you remained respectful during disagreements instead of saying things you would later regret. They remember how you quietly celebrated their happiness, even during seasons when your own heart was struggling. These memories once faded into the background because they didn't fit the emotional story your soulmate believed at the time. Now those same moments have become impossible to ignore because they perfectly match the person someone else recently described. Perhaps your soulmate is beginning to ask themselves a question that feels both painful and liberating. What if they judged isolated moments instead of the whole person? Human hearts often make that mistake. One misunderstanding becomes the lens through which every future action is interpreted. One painful experience overshadows 100 quiet demonstrations of kindness. That is why first impressions created during emotional storms can be so difficult to correct. But now, something inside them is finally breaking free from that pattern. They are realizing that your character remained remarkably consistent, even when circumstances around you were changing. You never became cruel simply because you were hurt. You never tried to damage their reputation to protect your own. You never turned pain into revenge. Instead, you continued carrying yourself with a quiet dignity that seemed ordinary at the time, but now feels extraordinary. As another timeless truth says, character is revealed not when life is easy, but when kindness survives disappointment. Looking back, they can no longer deny that your kindness survived moments that would have changed many other people. Imagine discovering that a melody you once believed was simple actually contained instruments you had never noticed before. The song hasn't changed. Your ears have simply learned how to hear it differently. Every hidden note suddenly gives the music an entirely new meaning. That is what is happening to your soulmate's memories. Every conversation now carries emotions they completely missed before. They remember pauses in your voice that sounded like patience rather than hesitation. They remember your silence after disagreements and realize it wasn't emotional distance, it was self-control. They remember times when you quietly stepped back, believing you had given up. But now they recognize something entirely different. You weren't giving up on love. You were refusing to let temporary emotions destroy something that still mattered to your heart. That realization has become deeply emotional because it reveals how many acts of love can go unnoticed when people are focused only on their own. And there is another realization growing stronger. With every passing day, your soulmate is beginning to understand that the person who defended you wasn't describing isolated good deeds. They were describing a pattern. Genuine kindness leaves behind a pattern. Integrity leaves behind a pattern. Compassion leaves behind a pattern. Those qualities cannot be performed occasionally just to impress someone. They become visible only when they consistently appear across different seasons, different people, and different situations. As they compare what they recently heard with what they personally experienced, those patterns are becoming impossible to deny. They remember how others often felt safe around you. They remember how people trusted you with their worries. They remember how your presence often brought calm instead of conflict. None of those moments seemed important before. But together, they now paint a picture of someone whose heart had always been quietly revealing itself. Now your soulmate finds themselves standing before a truth they never expected to face. They are no longer wondering whether you were misunderstood. They are beginning to wonder whether they ever truly allowed themselves to know the real you. Every memory they revisit seems to remove another layer of confusion. Every honest word they recently heard becomes another piece of a puzzle that is finally complete. And perhaps the most humbling realization of all is this: while they were searching for proof of your love in dramatic moments, your real heart had been revealing itself through ordinary acts of kindness every single day. It wasn't hidden because you wanted to create mystery. It remained unnoticed because genuine love rarely announces itself. It simply continues choosing patience, honesty, loyalty, and compassion, trusting that one day someone will finally have the eyes to see what was quietly there from the very beginning. One of the greatest misunderstandings about genuine love is believing that it must constantly defend itself to be real. The truth is, hearts that know who they are rarely spend their lives chasing approval. They simply continue living with honesty, trusting that time will eventually reveal what arguments never can. That is the lesson your soulmate is finally beginning to understand. Ever since they heard someone speak so confidently about your true character, they have been asking themselves a question they never considered before. Why didn't you spend all that time trying to convince them? Why didn't you argue harder, explain more, or fight to protect your image? The answer is far deeper than they once imagined. You weren't protecting your reputation, you were protecting your peace. You understood that forcing someone to believe in your goodness rarely creates genuine trust. Real understanding cannot be pressured into another person's heart. It must arrive naturally, just as it is arriving for your soulmate now. As the old saying reminds us, the river never argues with the rocks. It simply continues flowing until it reaches the sea. That quiet confidence became the language of your soul, even when it meant carrying the painful weight of being misunderstood. Imagine an old clock that keeps perfect time while everyone around it insists it is broken. Day after day, people question it because they refuse to compare it with the truth. The clock never changes its rhythm to satisfy their opinions. It simply continues doing exactly what it was created to do. Eventually, someone notices that every other clock is wrong, while this one has remained faithful all along. That is what your character has been doing throughout this connection. You never changed your values just because someone misunderstood your intentions. You never abandoned kindness because appreciation became scarce. You never turned bitterness into your identity simply because life became unfair. Looking back now, your soulmate is beginning to realize that your consistency was speaking much louder than your silence ever could. While emotions came and went, your integrity remained exactly the same. As another timeless truth says, consistency is the language of character. Without realizing it, you had been speaking that language every single day. Perhaps there were moments when you questioned yourself. Maybe you wondered whether staying quiet made you appear weak. Maybe you imagined how different everything could have been if you had defended yourself more passionately. Every sincere heart asks those questions when it feels unseen. But wisdom often grows through experiences that force us to choose between temporary validation and lasting peace. You chose peace. Not because it was easier, but because you understood that proving yourself to someone who isn't ready to listen often leaves both hearts more exhausted than healed. You trusted your actions to tell your story long after conversations had ended. You believed that the people who truly knew you would one day become the evidence you never needed to create yourself. That is exactly what has happened. The person who defended you wasn't repeating something you asked them to say. They were simply describing the person they had consistently experienced. That realization has humbled your soulmate more than any explanation ever could. Imagine a garden filled with flowers growing quietly through every season. The gardener never places signs beside each flower asking visitors to admire the work that was done. They simply continue watering, pruning, and caring for the garden because beauty has never needed to announce itself. One day, a traveler arrives and is overwhelmed by what they see. They naturally begin telling others about the incredible place they discovered. The gardener never requested praise. The beauty spoke for itself through someone who genuinely experienced it. That is what your life has done. Your compassion, your patience, your honesty, and your quiet strength became visible in the hearts of people who encountered the real you. When they speak about your character, they are not defending an image. They are sharing a truth they personally witnessed. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that there is a profound difference between someone trying to improve their reputation and someone whose reputation quietly grows because of the lives they have touched. Another realization is now unfolding inside your soulmate's heart, and it may be the most meaningful of all. They are beginning to admire not only what they recently heard about you, but the way you carried yourself before anyone defended you. You continued treating people with respect when nobody was applauding your kindness. You continued choosing honesty when shortcuts would have been easier. You continued protecting your values when nobody seemed to notice your sacrifices. That kind of strength cannot be performed for attention because it exists even when there is no audience. As another old saying wisely teaches, the roots of the strongest tree grow where no one can see them. Your greatest qualities were never built for public recognition. They were quietly growing beneath the surface, becoming part of who you truly are. Now your soulmate understands why one sincere conversation carried so much power. It wasn't because someone invented a beautiful version of you. It was because they described the same person your actions had always revealed. Now every memory feels different because your soulmate finally understands that your silence was never the absence of truth. It was the confidence of someone who refused to let temporary opinions define a lifetime of character. They see that while others may have spoken about you for a moment, you spent every day becoming the kind of person those words could honestly describe. That realization has changed the way they measure love, loyalty, and emotional maturity. They no longer admire you simply because someone defended you. They admire you because they finally recognize that you never needed anyone to create your goodness. It had always existed, patiently waiting for the right heart to notice it. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson this unexpected conversation has given them. A genuine soul does not spend its life demanding to be understood. It continues choosing kindness until the truth naturally introduces itself. Now that your soulmate has finally seen that truth through the eyes of someone who expected nothing in return, they can no longer mistake your quietness for weakness. They now recognize it for what it always was, the quiet strength of a heart that trusted truth to speak when the time was finally right. As this journey comes to its conclusion, one truth rises above every misunderstanding, every unanswered question, and every moment of silence that once separated your hearts. The most powerful things we learn about another person often come from someone who has absolutely nothing to gain by speaking well of them. That is why this single conversation has left such a deep mark on your soulmate's heart. The person who defended you wasn't trying to repair your connection. They weren't trying to persuade anyone to choose your side. They simply spoke honestly about the person they knew. Yet those simple words carried a weight that your own explanations may never have carried, because they came without expectation, without emotion, and without any desire to influence the outcome. Suddenly, your soulmate understood something that had been hidden in plain sight all along. Your heart had never been asking to be admired. It had only been asking to be seen. As the old saying reminds us, truth spoken without selfishness carries the greatest power. That is exactly what happened. One sincere voice accomplished what countless assumptions had failed to do. It allowed your soulmate to finally see your character without the shadows of past emotions standing in the way. Imagine walking through an art gallery and passing the same painting every day without giving it a second glance. Then one afternoon, an experienced artist quietly stands beside you and begins pointing out details you had never noticed before. The hidden brushstrokes, the careful balance of light, the emotions woven into every color. Suddenly the painting becomes breathtaking, not because it changed, but because your understanding changed. That is exactly what has happened to your soulmate. You are the same person you have always been. Your kindness has not become kinder. Your loyalty has not become stronger. Your heart has not suddenly transformed overnight. The only thing that has changed is their ability to truly see what was always standing before them. They are now recognizing the quiet patience behind your silence, the compassion behind your decisions, and the strength behind your refusal to become someone bitterness could control. As another timeless truth says, wisdom is not seeing something new. It is seeing what was always there with new eyes. That wisdom is slowly settling into your soulmate's heart, changing not only the way they remember you, but also the way they understand love itself. Perhaps you've spent a long time wondering whether remaining true to yourself was worth the pain. Maybe there were nights when you questioned whether kindness had become a weakness in a world that often rewards louder voices. You may have wondered if speaking less caused people to misunderstand you, or if protecting your peace cost you the chance to protect your reputation. Those questions are deeply human. Every sincere heart asks them at some point. But today the answer is becoming beautifully clear. Character has a remarkable way of introducing itself through the lives it quietly touches. You never had to build an image because your actions were already building a legacy inside the hearts of people who truly knew you. That is why someone else naturally defended you without being asked. They weren't protecting an idea. They were simply describing the reality they had experienced. As another old saying wisely teaches, the fragrance of a flower travels farther than the flower itself. Your kindness traveled into places you never realized, leaving impressions that spoke for you when you were no longer present. Imagine a lighthouse standing faithfully along the shoreline for decades. Most nights, passing ships never stop to thank it. They simply continue their journey, unaware of how many dangers its light quietly helped them avoid. Then one sailor tells another about the lighthouse that guided them safely through the storm, and suddenly everyone begins appreciating something that had been serving them all along. The lighthouse never changed its purpose. It simply continued shining. That is what your heart has been doing throughout this entire connection. You continued choosing honesty even when deception would have been easier. You continued choosing grace when resentment would have felt justified. You continued believing in the value of kindness even when kindness seemed invisible. Your soulmate now understands that your greatest strength was never found in dramatic words. It was found in your unwavering consistency. Every person who truly knew you saw the same qualities. Every genuine experience pointed toward the same conclusion. You were never pretending to be compassionate. Compassion was simply who you were. There is another realization now, growing quietly inside your soulmate, one that may remain with them for the rest of their life. They are beginning to understand that love should never be measured only by grand gestures or emotional declarations. Sometimes the deepest love is revealed through quiet integrity, steady loyalty, and a heart that refuses to become bitter even after disappointment. They are recognizing that while they were searching for proof in extraordinary moments, your true nature had been revealing itself through ordinary acts every single day. The respect you showed others, the patience you carried through difficult seasons, the kindness you offered without expecting applause, those were never isolated moments. They were reflections of the person you had always been. That realization is both beautiful and humbling because it reminds them that genuine souls rarely advertise themselves. They simply live in such a way that sooner or later someone else cannot help but speak about the goodness they have witnessed. And perhaps this is the ending the universe had quietly been preparing all along. Not an ending built upon regret, blame, or the need to prove who was right, but one rooted in truth, finally finding its way home. Whether this realization opens the door to a new chapter between you, or simply brings peace to hearts that once carried confusion, something priceless has already been restored. Your soulmate no longer remembers you through assumptions or misunderstandings. They remember you through the honesty of someone who had no reason to say anything except what they knew to be true. The conversation they recently heard did far more than defend your name. It revealed the quiet beauty of your character, the strength of your spirit, and the authenticity of your love. And perhaps that is the greatest miracle of all.